All right, good morning. Brave people, you are brave. I have to start by saying that the setup in Cape Town was actually cooler. I had one of those little wooden stage things. And if I close my eyes and drift into the happy place, it's my soapbox. So, imagine me on my little box, please, thank you. So, pink hardhats and other anomalies, diversity in software engineering, or maybe the lack thereof. In South Africa, there we go, clicking away, diversity and gender is the very, very tip of our diversity iceberg, obviously. Some of what we will look at today applies equally to race, to disability, LGBTQ, even age, and some is much more specific to gender. So let's start with the dry stuff, right? The numbers. When I first prepped this talk, a colleague said to me, just in conversation, that gender parity in our group of companies is very good. Nearly 50% of our staff are women. Wow, I was excited. But I'm not a completely trusting soul, so I went to HR to check these numbers, and they laughed at me. Because it turns out we are nowhere close. 25% of our staff are women. And that drops to 18% if you look at just project delivery staff. So that's close to half if you are speaking a language called politician. So what about individual disciplines? Okay. 52% of our business analysts and testers are women. So that's cool. But before you crack out the champagne, of 361 software engineers, 37 are women. Of those 37, 9 are African women. Our competitors weren't falling over their feet to share this kind of information with me. I can't imagine why, because, their numbers don't look anything like this. Yeah. So are we just lagging behind the developed world down here in sub-Saharan Africa? No. UNESCO have a long-running study into gender in the sciences. And in their 2017 report, they showed that between 15 and 25% of the workforce in a STEM organization will be women. It will take us 217 years to close that gender gap. If only that was the one we're chasing. In 2017, for the first time, UNESCO study showed that fewer women went into the sciences than ever before. Stats SA's numbers are a little bit older, but they tell a similar story. Between 2004 and 2014, they ran a study on gender in education. And in that time period, 4.5 million people in South Africa went into tertiary education. Of those 4.5 million, just on 1 million went into either physical or mathematical sciences or engineering. Of the 1 million, less than a third were women. Obviously, that doesn't give you a complete picture of all the people who could potentially work in a STEM organization. Not every software developer has an engineering degree, and business analysts and testers typically come through like a commerce or an economics faculty. But it gives you the idea, right? And it's grim. And then comes a surprising anomaly. In the 2017 academic year, across the board at South African universities, more undergraduate degrees were conferred on women than men. In 2017, South Africa produced more women graduates than men. Of course, we don't see those kinds of ratios in the sciences, but it helps dispel some of the nonsense around high dropout rates among female students. And it gives us good motivation to encourage young women into scientific study to begin with. Because I guess it doesn't take that I combined intellect in this room to figure out, intellect with an I, not an E, I'm not advertising, why that's not happening at the moment. Despite a whole lot of fuss and fanfare about the importance of maths and science at school level, our education system is not doing enough to meaningfully support these subject choices at school level. And the quickest way to kill an industry is to starve it of skilled people. So where to? In 2014, I met Lindiwe Machali. She is the founder of an organization called Africa Teen Geek. And their primary purpose is to expose teenagers in underserved schools to technology and computer science. Her stories were an absolute eye-opener for me. There is an entire generation of teachers in our school system who, from their own lack of exposure to technology, finds awesome tools like Google Classroom intimidating and more than a little bit mysterious. Like, I know we all have the days where it's the dark arts when the thing works and you couldn't explain how, but still. In South Africa, we also have the particular problem of our teacher trade unions, who are not especially supportive of anything that looks like it might threaten educator job security in the long term, no matter how good it is for the learners in the school. And all of this together means that when tools and programs are offered into schools that need it, they don't get the kind of support that you would expect. Lindiwe also explained to me that corporate South Africa is really good with a checkbook, and that donating computer hardware to underserved schools is a very fashionable thing to do. Don't get me wrong, if it wasn't for corporate social responsibility, computer hardware would just be a pipe dream for a lot of these schools. But there are more pieces to the puzzle. Like, you can have all the snazzy hardware in the world, but if you don't have a technology or computer science teacher on staff, that lab just sits there gathering dust. So to try and address this problem, Lindiwe and her team piloted a project with the Provincial Department of Education in KwaZulu-Natal. Together, they identified schools that had hardware, but did not have a suitably skilled teacher on staff. They then went into the communities around those schools and recruited 4 young people who had matriculated with maths and science but were unemployed. Those young people were contracted back to the Department of Education for a year, and in that year, they had to coach basic computer literacy for the learners at the school, computerize the school's record keeping, and offer computer literacy classes for the staff. And it was super successful. One of the other missing pieces, of course, is career exposure. Because even in schools that are willing and able to support science and scientific subjects, if a teenager does not know what career paths will be opened up to them through a particular set of subject choices, they're not likely to take those subjects, are they? If you ever feel the need to give back, and large groups of teenagers don't frighten you, because they're scary, consider volunteering a few hours to an organization like Africa Teen Geek to coach at a lab. Or join a high school roadshow. There is nothing more incredible than seeing the light switch on for a group of teenage girls when a young woman from the same background as themselves talks about what she does every day as a software engineer and why matric maths was important to get her where she is. It's not about what us corporates like to do at glossy career days. It is about relatable, accessible role models for the widest possible group of people. organizations like Africa Teen Geek are not the panacea to the problems in our education system. But until we can muster the political will for real long-term solutions in that space, we have to give these kinds of organizations our support, because they are so key to making sure that the next generation of software developer is actually being produced. So, speaking of teenagers, you would think I am old enough to know better than to read the comments section on the internet anyway. Yes, apparently not. On a MoneyWeb article by Microsoft's Lillian Barnard about gender diversity in the sciences, I found this gem. I'll give you a moment to read those, because, women hate money and, just hate money. So once I'd recovered from the rage-induced stroke and checked my calendar to make sure that I hadn't woken up in the 19th century, I realized to my absolute horror that this clown is right. Because even when we have managed to align all the stars and produce a quality computer science graduate, women are still choosing not to go into the sciences. I'm asked fairly often to comment on gender equality in this industry. And I always point out that it is improving. Not sure that that's 100% true, but it feels positive. But that we are still missing a trick. If a man and a woman were right here today, offered the same job for the same pay, we would pat ourselves on the back for achieving gender equality. But what if the woman couldn't keep the job because she can't commute safely? Or couldn't take the position to begin with because she doesn't have access to safe childcare? And these opportunities are equal, but they're not necessarily fair. Sure. This isn't just about what we do, getting women into the industry. It is equally about what we do once we've got them in the door. I was, I guess, surprised when I attended a Josie Jug meetup for Women's Month. Full house on a Saturday morning, 80-odd people. Mike's laughing because I promised I wouldn't name Rory in the story. Whoops. There were 4 women there. 4. And if you chat to people who organize those kinds of community events, they will tell you that this is pretty much par for the course. That nights and weekends will see very few women in the seats. And in this industry, we are a disappointingly judgy bunch when people are not going what we consider to be the extra mile. In South Africa, for a whole bunch of dysfunctional, patriarchal reasons, the bulk of responsibility for raising children, running homes, caring for elderly parents, being involved in community initiatives, that all still rests with women. Aside from these things having very real financial implications, they're time-consuming. They turn extras like hackathons and meetups into nice-to-haves. A young man in third-generation suburbia whose parents have paid for his university fees, who has use of a car, who is responsible only for himself, and some Saturday nights not even that, just needs less support from us as employers than the young woman who is going to spend 3 hours of her day in transport queues, who's going home to worry about getting her younger siblings through school, and whose salary is the household budget. And there's no room in there for the extra data that's needed to play with tech in her own time. the last few years, we've seen some pretty incredible independent initiatives start up to try and provide accessible learning spaces for women in this industry who want to improve their technical skills. And these are just a few of them. Without exception, these initiatives are... damn, I've lost one already. These initiatives are run by women who are single-minded about giving teenage girls and young women already in the industry that extra box to stand on. As a dev community, these organizations are exactly what we need. For the broader ICT industry, these organizations are exactly what we need. But as individual employer organizations within that industry, these organizations have given us the one thing we should never have been allowed to have, and that's a get-out-of-jail-free card. Because in providing financial and logistical support to these sorts of initiatives, we allow ourselves to outsource the hard work of giving extra support to those people in our own businesses who need it most. We write the check, pat ourselves on the back for a job well done, doing our bit, and we go back to the office and carry on the way we always have. Chicken and Pig decide to open a restaurant, just to lighten the mood. If you've been in Agile for a while, you've heard this joke. I'm sorry, it's old. Can't decide on a name. Chicken says, I've got it. We'll call it Ham and Eggs. Pig says, dude, you'd be involved. I'd be committed. And this, I have to say, is pretty much the same. If we want to meaningfully change the face of diversity in this industry, there is no room for egg-level involvement. It's ham and bacon all the way. And that's a note for lunch too. So if there are things that we know that we could and should be doing to improve diversity in this industry, why aren't we doing them? In reality, most of us in this industry have had such a great view over that fence for so long, we don't even understand that needing an extra box is a thing. So human beings come with a bit of hard coding, and that sees us want to classify things into groups. On the harmless end of the scale, that's me sorting my Smarties before I eat them. Yes, Katie's laughing at me now because it's true. It's been seen. On the other end of the spectrum, it sees us want to classify people into groups based on perceived similarities. And not just physical similarities, we are continuously putting people into boxes based on our perceptions of their temperament, their behavior, their intelligence. The anthropologists assure us it's not broken, it's a coping mechanism. A few millennia back, this is what stopped you flinging open the cave door to the cannibals. These days, it is a tool that allows us to pre-process some of the barrage of information we are continuously faced with. In the workplace, it sees us putting together teams of people who are similar, both to each other and to ourselves. And what forms in the organization is something called hiring bias. So if you're involved in recruitment in your company, you will know that interviews are a high-stakes game. 60 minutes of Q&A is all you get on which to base a decision that can wreck your career, my career, the client's project, all in one go. So we go in with assessment results and tough technical questions, looking for that elusive fit to company culture. That thing that we cannot articulate to the recruitment team, but we'll know it when we see it. Yeah. When a candidate is turned down because they weren't right for the organization, It is seldom because the interviewer's spidey sense was tingling when the candidate described their work ethic or explained why they'd had 8 jobs in 4 years. Most hiring managers are simply trying to gauge how quickly they can find common ground with the candidates. Do we have shared experiences, a similar worldview? Are you going to fit into my group in a way that I understand? Or am I going to have to work quite hard to figure out what makes you tick and your context? Particularly in South Africa, when you are talking to someone of a different race, a different gender, and pardon the expression, a different social class, that common ground is very hard to find. And in fact, it probably doesn't exist. Crucially, that does not mean the person will not be able to deliver in your environment. All it means is that your mental biases have crossed them off the list before they've even had a chance to prove themselves. One of the biggest problems we have with hiring bias is admitting that it exists. But just like recovering addicts, once we've admitted we have a problem, the clever behavioral scientists tell us there are 2 quite simple ways to fix this. The first is one that most of our organizations, I think, are now pretty good at, and that's having an objective skills assessment as the core of the recruitment process. Because once a person has demonstrated a level of ability, any subjective opinion about them just carries less weight. The second, not so much. When last did you hear about training for new hiring managers? Yeah, no. Particularly in this industry, people are promoted into management positions off the back of excellent technical performance. And there are polar opposite views on whether this is right or wrong. But the argument is academic, because when the majority of your organization is engineers, where else are your hiring managers going to come from? And regardless of your view on that, the one thing we can probably all agree on is that the personality type that makes a cracking engineer is not blessed with an abundance of people skills. New hiring managers deserve to be trained. They need to be made aware that they're going to be prone to bias and given a set of tools to deal with it when they find, surprise, surprise, that they actually are. And then you watch them like a hawk, because we're all just overgrown kids and far more likely to behave ourselves when we know someone is watching and that we're going to get in trouble if we do wrong. It takes a while. But once you have a critical mass of diversity in your organization, it becomes self-perpetuating. Even if you never manage to eliminate hiring bias, it is less destructive just because it's less focused on a single demographic. It is also theoretically easier to organically move diversity into your management teams. I say theoretically because that's the topic of next year's talk. Yes. And 2 people already leaving attest to this, but there's probably someone still sat in the room going, that's 20 minutes of my life I'm never getting back. My team is fine. We gel, we get each other. We work hard, we've got a bit of a drinking, braaiing thing going on over the weekends. Sure, we're not the most diverse bunch, but we deliver. What's the problem? It's not broken. Why are we trying to fix something that's not broken? Sorry, because top of the list is that our generations have been given the moral, ethical, and unenviable task of trying to unravel some of the current societal mess. But if I can't convince you that's a good enough reason to tackle this problem, then maybe I can appeal to your A-type personalities. Because if your high-performing team was more diverse, it could be performing better. For a while now, we have been hearing about the benefits of diversity in particularly sales and marketing. A broader demographic in your product development team means that you are more likely to develop a product that meets your consumers' actual needs, as opposed to your ideas of what their needs are. More diversity in sales and marketing means that you are more likely to create a sales message that will reach and really be heard by your target market. And these things are a lot harder than we think they are. Because sure, you look at the kind of PR nightmare that the likes of Outsurance and H&M and Dove and Nivea and have managed to unleash on themselves. And we don't seem to listen when these things happen. And a couple of years ago at a conference, I heard a middle-aged white man, South African, talk about the loyalty and rewards program that his business was rolling out in spaza shops. And I'm going to admit to you, I laughed during the Q&A when the young black members of that audience took him apart in the Q&A. They took him to pieces because he didn't have a clue what he was talking about. So then the question is, in an industry like ours, where the decisions around what products you're building, who they're being sold to, how they're being sold, probably aren't yours. They're your clients. So then really, what does it matter what the diversity of your team is? Well, it matters because we're all in this for the money, if nothing else. I don't have a smart answer for that. I haven't had enough coffee. Right, let's talk. Thanks, Rob. There we go. Have we moved? Yes, we're all in this for the money. Good stuff. So in a 2015 McKinsey report on listed companies, they found that those companies that had scored in the top 25% for racial diversity in their management teams, senior management teams, were 35% more likely to produce a financial result above their industry average. And the top scorers for gender diversity, 15% more likely to produce a return above average. It's significant. So what is the secret ingredient that powers this performance? Diverse teams produce better results because they're uncomfortable. We have another hard-coded bias that the psychologists call the fluency heuristic. We are wired up to prefer information that we can process easily. When you work in a team that is similar to you, you are hearing ideas that are positioned in a way that you understand. It feels less strenuous to work in a team like this, frankly, because it is. Because most of the time your brain is doing this. And if you're sipping the proverbial mental pina colada, you can be pretty sure you're not producing your best thinking. However, in a team that is diverse, you are challenged with ideas and viewpoints that are completely different from your own. It's a mental load. It's all much harder to process. And in that space of cognitive discomfort, you are more likely to be creative, you are more analytical, and you are less likely to do that weird blur of fact and assumption on which most of us base our decisions. Diverse teams produce better results precisely because it is harder to produce them. So aside from missing out on the benefits of diversity, homogeneity has some other more unpleasant side effects. Like it can be the precursor to herd mentality, that where a typically homogeneous group influences itself into making emotional rather than rational decisions. Ah, no, I hear you say. We're engineers, we're smarter than that. Until the last election, all of America thought it was smarter than that. Our industry has a completely deserved reputation for being the home of all geeks. Yeah? We fly our flags high, it's fine. Geekdom as a subculture is seen as a bit of a safe haven. You won't be picked on for being too smart. You won't be left out because your hobbies don't involve bicycles. You can be different. It's all good. Until it isn't. This is Kelly Marie Tran. She is an American actress of Vietnamese descent, and she plays a rebel mechanic in Star Wars: The Last Jedi. In the middle of last year, she deleted her social media accounts after months of abuse at the hands of the die-hard Star Wars fans, who were simply upset that an Asian woman had been cast in this role. So maybe not such a safe refuge when that herd has turned all feral pack. I trust that you aren't bullying anyone in your project teams to this extent. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. But we have to be super careful that we don't allow the herd to tacitly influence what we regard as normal behavior in our workplace. The team buildings that start and end in the bottom of a bottle. Gender bias in our communication. Gender and race bias in our promotional imagery. All the way through to team social activities that are only ever organized on a weekday evening, thereby excluding the same single parent every time. Because if we don't check our biases, there are dozens upon dozens of ways that we can make the workplace a thoroughly unpleasant place for a person who doesn't fit our idea of normal. One of the other nasties caused by homogeneity is tokenism, or as I like to call it, unicorn syndrome. Let me tell you a story about unicorn syndrome. I was recruited out of university by what was then an absolute rarity, a female CIO. And for the first 10 years of my career, the lack of women in technology did not feature for me, because not surprisingly, our teams were full of women. When I left that organization, I moved into one where the majority of middle and senior management were men. Regularly being the only girl in the room, that came as a bit of a shock. I'd like to say that this is the part of the story where I put on my superhero cape and save the world. Yeah, no. It's the bit of the story where I turn into a unicorn. So for the next couple of slides, you're going to need a working definition of a unicorn. First, they are real. Nod, agree, yes, thank you, Christina. Secondly, they are what women in technology turn into when they are conditioned to believe that they are some kind of anomaly. And thirdly, they are conceited little things, and they don't like competition. I asked an audience once if the woman there had ever been the only one in their project team. Yeah, lots of hands up all over the room. When I asked if any of them had liked it, oh no, crickets. No one was admitting to that. I'm not buying it. Because in an industry like ours, that is notoriously intellectually challenging, being continuously admired, that strokes that unicorn's ego. As the longer the unicorn is stroked and fussed over, the happier it is to be the only one. But the longer it's alone, the more it starts believing it is a unicorn, and the more it starts conforming to unicorn behavior. But that's the unicorn's problem, right? Well, no. Because the more the unicorn conforms, the more it sets an expectation of how women in this industry believe they should think and act. We think we've got to be doing this, or this. Ooh, yes, that too. That. Heaven help my scarred knees, this one. Or quite often this. Yeah. And if you were going to be doing any of that stuff anyway, that's cool. But there's a good chance you won't. 5 years ago, I took over as the MD of the business I'm in now. I was the second woman to lead the business in an environment that was still predominantly a boys' club. Sure, my unicorniness knew no bounds. Some of the consequences of being the only woman in the room were starting to occur to me. But I did what I suspect a lot of us do in these sorts of situations. I simply put on the unicorn suit I was being handed and got on with my job. And I lost myself completely, because many of the traits that had got me into the role to begin with, I pushed aside in favor of being all pink and sparkly and unicorny, and whatever it was I thought the industry was expecting of me. Now, if I was a pink sparkly unicorn, that would be great. A little bit more like this thing. And then two very wise people, in very different ways, asked me if I had made my new role my own. Didn't take a whole lot of pondering to realize that I hadn't. I'd been far too busy conforming to allow myself to lead from a space that was me-shaped. And in doing that, I had inadvertently set some expectations for the people in my own business. It was hard to admit that I'd been part of the diversity problem in my own organization. Really hard. Because in filling any predefined shape, we do ourselves and those who come after us just the biggest disservice. It comes back to relatable, accessible role models for the widest possible spectrum of people in this industry. Those looking in through the windows of the industry, if they're seeing nothing but unicorns frolicking around in there, unless they are one, they probably aren't going to try the door. You might be judged a bit for being completely yourself in the workplace. I promise it'll be less than you think. You'll be happier. When you're happier, you deliver better. When you deliver better, you care a whole lot less about the perceptions and the opinions and the expectations. You'll also be doing the very best thing possible for the next generation of women in technology. And that is teaching the room that the only expectation they may rightly have of us is that we do a good job. Because if we don't do the hard work now to check our biases and make it completely okay for all different kinds of people to be completely comfortable in this industry, well, I reckon the outlook for all of us is pretty grim. Thank you.
Hi. Well, I'm not actually sure if it's a question or a concern, but we'll see how it works out. Great talk, by the way. You're sending a great message, and by the looks of it, you're attracting a really diverse audience, the most diverse audience I ever saw in an IT conference. But that's actually the concern I have now, because I now feel like a minority. It's nice to feel that way as a white male, but I think this message is most important for those people who are like me. How can we get this message across to them if they're not coming here to hear you out?
It's a very interesting question, and I can probably flip it and say, you tell me. Because if we have to produce a message that's going to be heard and understood by the majority represented in this industry, those who are willing to kind of step up and be part of the solution have to say, well, this is how you position it in a way that we will hear. And those of us who are keen to change it are keen to work with everybody to find a solution.
Thank you first for the unicorn analogy. I realize I'm guilty of grooming a couple of unicorns and treating them special. And it's actually a thing I've talked about, chivalric sexism, where unintentionally I'm trying to be nice, but actually I'm being sexist in that kind of way, where I think, oh, I need to treat you like you're special, I need to treat you like, that you're important, but actually what harm am I potentially doing by being chivalrous? My question, though, is besides an increased paycheck, do you have other ideas of creating equity rather than equality? Because when we've chatted about the problems and we said, oh, we could provide training, we could do these kind of programs, they've kind of felt, yeah, a guy could do that as well. There's not, we're just excluding guys rather than creating an equity, or it doesn't feel like we're creating equity, we're just creating equality that's then cut off to other members.
So a couple of weeks ago, we ran a diversity-related program at a meetup, and one of the young women there said something quite profound off the back of a T-shirt that's being sold in one of our major retailers here that says, "The future is female." And this is a young African woman, and I was surprised to hear the opinion from her, because I thought she would be probably quite supportive of that message. And she said, that is so not the point. The point is the future is for everyone. That's all we're arguing for. And it resonated with me for a whole lot of personal reasons. But I think that is probably quite core to the answer to your question, that it isn't about swinging the pendulum so far in the other direction that you've now excluded a whole bunch of other people. That's not the point. The point is to create enough space in your workplace for everyone's ideas to be heard. So team buildings and team activities, they come up often in these discussions because the typical kind of, oh yeah, we'll go and do a outdoorsy kind of team building. And someone will say, oh, I don't really want to do that. No, just do it. It'll be fun, kind of thing. Instead of opening up a conversation and saying, well, okay, what do you suggest we do instead? And I think that the best thing to start doing is not to look for programs and complicated things within your organizations. It's to start the conversations and create the space to have the conversations, because it's amazing what people will share when they feel that they're in a space that they will be heard. And don't let your boss run it. Or if you are the boss, don't run it. I learned that too.
All right, so I'm in a hiring position where I get to choose who comes in or not. And from my experience for the companies I've worked for, every company wants to capitalize on market, and whatever best results they get of whatever they do is what they want to keep doing. If you want to hire less people who are likely to get pregnant, for instance.
Yeah.
And I think for me it needs to be a deliberate thing for a company to be people focused. It's a mentality that is different from a capitalist mentality, where you look at the people as your biggest capital towards the main capital that you want to get. And that is very hard to push upwards to the people who's looking at numbers. How do you do that effectively?
Persistently.
Because, how do you persistently go upwards and say, we need to start looking at that? Because half the time you're looking at it bringing people in, and you want to equalize the numbers of bringing diversity with the numbers of making money. And it's a big investment for most companies to create diversity because of many reasons. Yeah. And it's very hard for somebody at my level, middle management, to push it upwards and say, let's do this, it'll work out in the next 5 years, But how do you push it upwards towards people who are not as operational as you on the floor?
So, something I said to someone in the audience in Cape Town is that please do not underestimate the power you have in the lower levels of the organization. Because I think you do. I think people on the ground, sort of, and even kind of team lead and kind of next level up management, they don't feel that they have enough opportunity to sway the opinions of senior management, and it just isn't true. What is very helpful is a bit of critical mass. So there will be like-minded people in your organization at your level. Band together, stage an attack. I mean, talk to management as a group. And have some science. There's plenty of research available. Look it up. Because it's one thing to go with an emotive argument to your management and say, we feel that this will help change the organization. It's another thing to go armed with the stats that say, if we do this thing, our financial returns are going to look better. And that's very persuasive for us capitalists. We are sorry.
Well, firstly, I agree with your answer to the first gentleman, because the role of allies is to convince people that are in the same position as them, right? And only you can come up with that. My question is more in tune with the last thing that you just said. You said if you go to them with numbers, because the bottom line for capitalists is profits. I think where I'm at currently, I'm struggling with the opposite of what the last gentleman spoke about. How do you convince your middle management that training and continuous improvement and making time for that is beneficial to their team? Because they'll constantly tell you about, we have deadlines to meet, and those are non-negotiable, priority first. So how do you convince them that that has to be worked into the planning, because that's how you actually grow your team, and that's how you start working more efficiently, if you can actually make time for the training and that continuous improvement?
Yeah, I have to say I think my answer to that is similar it is similar, because there's plenty of evidence as to why a well-skilled, well-trained team is going to produce a better set of results and is going to be more efficient and all of those good things. In that particular situation, you want senior management on your side. However you choose to get that is your endeavour. We will ignore the brown envelope under the table or whatever it is. Because middle management are probably the most insecure level of your organisation. So it takes pressure from both directions to change. So win some allies in senior management. They're available, I promise. And go as a group. Stage an attack. No, not that.
Hi, great talk. Just reaffirming something that you said earlier about, sorry, I can't rephrase it as nicely as you said it. Don't be scared about what people think of you, and as long as you just deliver, basically, as long as you get a good job done. Just to reaffirm that, I saw some statistics from Lorien. It's a recruiting company in IT space from London, and they found that women will not apply for a job if they don't 100% fit the profile that was set out. Whereas men, on the other side, 50 to 60%, and they will still apply for the job. So totally agree with you there. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I agree with all the organizations, Girl Code, Geeks, and all of that, 100% with it. But I feel that when we have organizations like that are specifically female-oriented, we are actually creating a problem. And I will explain why. Because I was at a Girl Code hackathon that was, I think, advertised on a meetup, so there were some other guys that had attended, like boys that attended the hackathon. And it was lovely, okay? And some of the girls that were part of that organization were actually very mad that guys attended a Girl Code hackathon. How dare they? And that was the point that I sat and explained to them. It's not about you knowing that you can do it. You know it. You're a girl. You can code. Awesome. Lovely. Good for you. But it's about a guy accepting that you can actually do it. So I think that sometimes the structure of these organizations actually try to create a very, yeah, we're a woman, we're better than you guys, we're going to take you down. It's actually going to be a female-dominant environment. Never will happen. Okay? But we have to change the way everyone thinks.
It's a big job. And that speaks to that pendulum being pushed too far the other way. But it's never going to get back to the center if it hasn't swung far enough over. And the reality is, because of the highly patriarchal nature of South African society, if you don't create those sorts of spaces that are exclusively for women, they aren't necessarily going to feel that they can go and participate in a broader mixed gender kind of group. And these things, like, if we had a magic wand, we would have changed all this stuff already, right? It's a process. So someone from Poland said the same thing to me earlier in the week, so yeah, I wanted to cry.
My degree, like computer systems engineering, 100 people, 3 girls.
So for me, it has to be deliberate.
Very.
It's because one extreme gives birth to another. It has to be a deliberate extreme for us to get more women, more diversity in the industry.
Yeah.
I get the sense from your presentation that there's a bit of like powerlessness among the females, call it like the female group or whatever, any minority group. Is there anything that you think organizations can do maybe to empower them more so that they won't turn into those conceding unicorns?
I think the problem actually in tokenism is almost the reverse, because it's not about being powerless, it's almost about being all-powerful, which in fact is just as dangerous. But I think you're quite right. There is a very strong sense of powerlessness in minority representation in groups in South Africa. Like, how do we fix society? Come guys, quick, we've got 5 minutes, sort of thing. But I personally feel very, very strongly about the spaces for the conversations that I mentioned earlier. Because in a company, the more, and those things shouldn't have management in them to start with if you can possibly avoid it, because they have control issues. Can't imagine why. But when management see those sorts of things happening in an organization, they do kind of wake up a little bit. Like there are groups of people talking about how to change us, to make us better. We should listen to these. And if you're working in an organization that doesn't kind of pay attention when they hear about that kind of positive change, who am I misquoting when I say, if you can't change your organization, change your organization? Because, really, software engineers are a very powerful force in this market. Demand outstrips supply tenfold over. Vote with your feet.